soon. Hello, everybody. It's again a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. Today we are here a bit earlier than usual, and we have the pleasure to have as our guest speaker Professor Zoltán Kövecses, a friend of some of us because of our, research and the connections we made throughout the years. And he has kindly given of his time, and it's really an honor to have Zoltán Kövecses with us this afternoon. He's going to be talking about a very timely and interesting theme, because we know conceptual metaphor theory has developed since its initial start in the 80s. And he's going to bring some of these new notions in conceptual metaphor theory to us this afternoon. And so we can expect to have a very good talk. Before we start, I would like to say just a few words about Zoltán. Professor Zoltán Kövecses is a Professor Emeritus in the Department of American Studies at Eötvös-Loránd University. His research interests include metaphor, metonymy, emotion, language, American English and culture, and the relationship between metaphorical conceptualization and context. His most recent publications include Where Metaphors Come From, published in 2015 by Oxford University Press, and an extended conceptual metaphor theory, published this year by Cambridge University Press. This is only a very brief summary of the professor's academic interests. If you want to know more about him, there is the internet and other media for you to find out. So Zoltán, be welcome. Thank you very much to be with us. And we are going to listen to you now.
Okay, good afternoon and good evening. My time, I should say good evening to everyone, and it's wonderful to be in this Brazilian company where I know so many people so well, and I appreciate a lot. And as you can see, well, thank you, obviously, thank you for inviting me to give this talk, and I hope I can overcome all the technical hurdles, because Anna knows best that it was not easy to get to this point that you can see me, but I am not sure that I can actually start my slides. I check my...
Yes, you can start your slides now.
Okay.
Good.
Am I on? Okay.
We can see you, Zoltán.
Okay, good. It's a little bit strange that I cannot see any of the faces, but it's okay. I'm trying to get used to this. So as you can see, I will be concerned with some new notions in conceptual metaphor theory today, and I'm going to take you through a number of concepts that I have developed in the past 10 years, let's say, for the analysis of conceptual metaphors. And I hope that they will be of some interest and maybe some use to you. I will be using a single example to do all this, and the example that I want to focus on and that I want to analyze at some depth in presenting the theory is this. The 2005 hurricane capsized Domino's life, though he is loath to confess any inconvenience or misery outside of missing his social circle. I will be concerned with the metaphorical expression, the hurricane capsized Domino's life. Obviously, the metaphorical part of this is capsize. Capsize is a sailing term, overturning of a boat, and the hurricane capsized his life. So, what are the concepts? What are the theoretical tools, the conceptual tools that we need to understand how we understand this sentence so easily when we are confronted with it? As you can see, this was published in USA Today in 2007, 2 years after the actual hurricane hit New Orleans. Is everything okay?
Roberta,
Yes.
por favor, desliga o seu microfone.
Okay, can I go on? Hello?
Sure.
Okay, so
You can go on.
the first conceptual tool that this theory that I am developing requires is meaning, metaphorical meaning. And I want to distinguish 3 different kinds of metaphorical meaning. One that I call meaningfulness, the other is decontextualized meaning, and the third one is contextualized meaning. As a matter of fact, there is also probably a fourth meaning, which would be the literal meaning of capsize. But I do not list it here because these are kinds of meaning that apply to a particular metaphorical expression. So let me take each of these in turn. Metaphorical meaningfulness arises when we look at an imagined or real situation and we find that it makes sense metaphorically. We find the situation meaningful by means of some generic metaphor. By a generic metaphor, I mean something like a primary metaphor in greatest sense, and we, in being confronted with a given situation, we are looking for and hopefully find a particular generic level metaphor, a primary metaphor that applies to that situation. And it is this applicability, it is this suitability of this metaphorical understanding of the situation that gives us the initial idea of what this is all about and whether we can understand it at all, whether we can interpret it at all. And so we understand the situation in terms of such a primary metaphor. Now, this is very close to ideas in cognitive psychology, which state that our recognition of an object, for example, is based on some much more generic concept, like for example, the container image schema. We can apply that to the understanding of a house, or as a matter of fact, notions like verticality when we understand what a tree is. So according to these studies in cognitive psychology, especially developmental aspects of cognitive psychology, when we are approaching an object or a situation, we come up with something initially. We come up with something much, much more general than what we take to be a specific concept, like a tree or like a building. And And in the metaphor situation, when we conceptualize something, we use a primary metaphor in something like, that fashion. Decontextualize metaphorical meaning. In this case, there is a conventional conceptual metaphor that applies to that meaningful situation. So initially, when we are confronted with the situation, we are applying a particular generic metaphor, like a primary metaphor, and then go to a more specific kind of conceptual metaphor that applies to that meaningful situation. Or we can say that it is the primary metaphor that evokes or leads us to the next step when we understand the situation by in terms of mappings between two domains or frames as these are represented in long-term memory. Okay, the contextualized or contextual metaphorical meaning arises in any specific context when we understand, when we conceptualize something metaphorically, like Domino's life capsized, or the hurricane capsized Domino's life. The contextualized meaning is an extremely rich metaphorical meaning that is based on conceptually very rich and specific level in the course of online use. This is where frames or domains come into the picture. And we choose a particular specific aspect of a domain and apply that to the situation. The particular situation that we can see here in this example is the movement situation, because that's what the word capsize evokes or activates in the brain. And in that given specific situation, in context, we use a highly specific metaphor when we are actually using the metaphor online. Okay, another kind of conceptual tool that we need is what I call conceptual structures. By conceptual structure, I do not mean the conceptual system. What I mean is a particular conceptual structure, like an image schema, like a domain, a frame, or a mental space. These are all conceptual structures. So I am not talking about when I refer to conceptual structure, I do not mean the complexity of all the image schemas, domains, frames, mental spaces, and so on in the mind. What I mean is that when we are conceptualizing a situation metaphorically, we need image schemas, domains, frames, and mental spaces. I will soon get to the point where I can show this in much more specific ways. So as a result of this, we get image schema level metaphors, domain level metaphors, frame level metaphors, and mental space level metaphors. Now, we are making use of all of these at the same time. So every act of metaphorical conceptualization in a given situation by means of what we call a conceptual metaphor, and this is my major claim, requires schema level metaphors, like the primary metaphors that I mentioned at the beginning, domain level metaphors, frame level metaphors, and mental space level metaphors, all at the same time. We also need to make a distinction between two kinds of memory that are involved in metaphorical conceptualization, long-term memory and working memory. Some of the metaphors will arise from long-term memory, and some of the metaphors will arise in working memory. And obviously, my claim is that the schema level or the high-level primary metaphors and the domain level metaphors and the frame level metaphors are already present in long-term memory. It is the metaphor that arises in working memory that's going to be new. We also need to distinguish some ontological levels in metaphorical conceptualization. There is what I call the sub-individual level, the supra-individual level, and the individual level. This is an idea that I used in my 2002 book, Metaphor, A Practical Introduction, where I talk about the sub-individual level as something probably universal, as most primary metaphors are universal. The supra-individual level would include all the domain level and frame level metaphors, and these are the metaphors that are highly culture specific. And there is the individual level metaphor. These are the metaphors that we use in online communication in a given communicative situation. And these are the mental space level metaphors. Now, let's see all this, the three types of meaning, all the other things that we have dealt with, the three types of meaning, the four types of conceptual structures, and the two types of memory, and the three ontological levels, how these play out in the understanding of the example of capsize, the hurricane capsized Domino's life. Meaningfulness, I believe, is provided by two well-known primary metaphors. Action is self-propelled motion, and functionality is remaining erect. So when we are a part of the situation and want to interpret the situation, probably these two metaphors come to mind first. Well, of course, here I am making psychological claims that I should not be, but this is my hypothesis. And it remains to be seen whether this is exactly how it is happening. So my proposal is that the situation in which a journalist interviews Fats Domino in New Orleans 2 years after the hurricane, these are the highly active and probably initially active conceptual metaphors, these two primary metaphors that come to his mind. There is also the decontextualized meaning provided by two metaphors. These are familiar to everyone here. Life is travel, and living a life is journeying. Notice that I am making a distinction between life is travel and living a life is journeying, or life is a journey. Contextualized meaning arises from a particular mental space level metaphor, and you can see that this metaphor is very different from all the previous ones. It's much longer and it's much more detailed, much more information rich, and much more specific. Notice, a sudden, unexpected turn of events for the verse in Domino's life corresponds to the capsizing of Domino's boat in the course of his sea journey. I believe that contextualized meaning derives from such mental space level metaphors. Now, what about the conceptual structures that I was talking about, the schema level metaphors, the domain level metaphors, the frame level metaphors, and the mental space level metaphors? Given this example, we can say that the action is self-propelled motion and functionality is remaining erect are schema level metaphors. They are primary metaphors. The domain level metaphor, in terms of which we understand the situation and which is made meaningful and is probably also activated by the two primary metaphors, is life is travel. But these are two generic domains, life and travel. There is no correspondence between every aspect of life and travel. We have to get more specific in order to get those correspondences. We have to go to certain aspects of a travel, and the aspect that is crucially important is journey. As Fillmore says, or said in his FrameNet project, journey is the active part of travel. Travel is more general than journey, and journeying is what we do when we are actively participating in some travel and we actually move around. So living a life is journeying, or as it is better known, life is a journey, is a frame level metaphor. But at the mental space level, we get the metaphor that I mentioned previously. A sudden, unexpected turn of events for the verse in Domino's life is the capsizing of Domino's boat in the course of his sea journey. Notice that this very rich, information-rich, and highly specific metaphor is essentially structured by the life is a journey metaphor. That provides the basic structure for the mental space level metaphor, but the mental space level metaphor is much more specific. Here we are talking about the sudden unexpected turn of events for the verse. We are talking about a particular person, unlike in the life is a journey metaphor, which spells out only the roles in the frame, but not the actual values of the frame that we get at the mental space level. In terms of memory, we have long-term memory, and as I mentioned, we probably have all the action is self-propelled motion, and so life is travel, life is a journey metaphors come from long-term memory. These are already stored in the mind or in the metaphorical conceptual system somehow. What appears, however, in working memory is the mental space level metaphor that we have discussed. There is a further distinction, a two-way distinction that cross-cuts the long-term memory, working memory distinction, is that the primary metaphors by their nature are analog structures in the brain, as opposed to life is travel and life is a journey that are propositional structures. As far as ontological levels are concerned, the action is self-propelled motion and functionality is remaining erect. Primary metaphors belong to the sub-individual level. They are completely unconscious. They develop unconsciously, and this is Lakoff and Johnson's major point concerning primary metaphors, that we acquire them whether we want to acquire them or not. And they are, because they're based on some of our most basic bodily experiences. So in that sense, they would be at the sub-individual level, and because people are similar physiologically and physically and bodily, they would be also universal. The supra-individual level consists of both life is travel and living a life is journeying. And as I said, they are probably much more culture dependent than the sub-individual level metaphor, like action is self-propelled motion. And the individual level, as the name implies, can be a completely unique, one-time, individual level conceptual metaphor. It is still a conceptual metaphor, but it is formulated by an individual in an extremely rich way, highly specifically filling out all the roles that the supra-individual level metaphors offer to be filled out. In this case, the particular person who shows up in this kind of frame is Fats Domino, the rock musician, and you know, it's about how his life changes unexpectedly for the worse as a result of the hurricane. So these are the interrelations between the four components: the metaphorical meanings, the conceptual structures, the kinds of memory, and the ontological levels. Notice that at the level of meaningfulness, we have the imischema metaphors. We have also long-term memory participating in the cognitive processing of all this, and we have the sub-individual level metaphors, ontologically speaking. As far as decontextualized meaning is concerned, that is happening when we are dealing with domain level metaphors and frame level metaphors. And this is also connected to long-term memory. And ontological level wise, we are at the supra-individual level. The supra-individual in the sense that this is somehow in the language, this is somehow in the speaker's metaphorical conceptual system, speakers who make up a particular linguistic community. In that sense, it is the supra-individual level. And as regards the contextual meaning, that is given expression by a mental space level metaphor, as we saw. And this is happening in working memory, and it is happening at the individual level. So this would be how all these four components of the new view, if I can call that the new view, are hanging together. Okay, now how can we operationalize metaphoric meaning making? Because, you know, a table like this, although it lists all the conceptual tools that I have been discussing as necessary for the understanding of a single metaphorical expression like capsize, this is highly static. Let's try to operationalize this table and see what happens. So the issue that needs to be discussed is, how do we go from the literal meaning of capsize, which is overturn, to its metaphorical contextual meaning, which is a sudden unexpected turn for the verse in Domino's life. This is the target domain part of the mental space level metaphor. That provides us with the contextual meaning. How do we go from capsize to the much longer and much more involved, rich, much richer and specific metaphorical meaning, sudden unexpected turn for the verse in Domino's life? And this is the example again that we saw. So if we try to get rid of the static perspective that we have applied so far, then it is inevitable to respond to this kind of question. Again, I know that I am in, you know, dangerous waters in a way, because only a psycholinguist or a psychologist is supposed to talk about things like this. What does actually happen when we understand a particular metaphor? Again, I intend this to be a hypothetical idea. The answer to my question is that we go from the literal meaning, capsize, to the contextual meaning, because the schematicity hierarchy connects the literal meaning with the contextual meaning. This is the schematicity hierarchy. It is schema level metaphor, domain level metaphor, frame level metaphor, mental space level metaphor, and the literal meaning is not given here. But to understand that literal meaning, the hurricane capsized Domino's life, we have to go through, at least I imagine, we have to go through the schematicity hierarchy. In other words, it is the schematicity hierarchy that connects the literal meaning with the contextual meaning. This is happening in the case of correlation-based metaphors. So the schematicity hierarchies that apply to correlation metaphors function as metaphoric conceptual pathways between the literal meaning and the contextual meaning. So I am thinking of what we do, what the mind does, what the brain does when we go from a literal meaning to a contextual metaphorical, or a metaphorical contextual meaning, as a metaphoric conceptual pathway. So that's the new term that I would like to introduce. And I think in all of the cases that I have looked at, this is an inevitable kind of question, and this is the inevitable kind of answer, that in order to go from a literal meaning to a metaphorical contextual meaning, you need a metaphoric conceptual pathway that is provided by schematicity hierarchy. So this is how I imagine to operationalize the static table of conceptual tools that I have discussed so far. But of course, another inevitable question arises: what about resemblance metaphors? Do resemblance metaphors require the same kind of metaphoric conceptual pathway as the correlation-based metaphors do, like the hurricane capsized domino's life? Well, let's see an example and let's see what we can find out. This is an example that comes from Google, and the relevant part is much of the interior of the 96-year-old Wells building needs to be gutted. Okay, like an animal is gutted when they take the bowels and the internal parts of the animal out. The building needs to be gutted. Okay, so how do we understand this? My suggestion would be that what we rely on primarily is a shared complex image schema. So if you have the animal gutting and you have gutting a building, there is a shared complex image schema there. Namely, the complex image schema of an object which is inside the container that is removed from the container. If nothing else, the literal meaning of gut and the metaphorical meaning of gut has this much in common: a shared complex image schema, and this is the basis for the conceptual pathway, the metaphoric conceptual pathway. So in the case of resemblance-based metaphors, it is not a schematicity hierarchy in the previous sense that's responsible for the metaphoric meaning, but it is the shared complex image schema that I have tried to spell out here. An object inside the container is removed from the container. And ideally, I wanted to insert a diagram here, but unfortunately, my computer skills did not make it possible to insert a nice image that I have otherwise for this. Okay. A third inevitable question in connection with all this is why does the journalist, in the course of the interview and in his description of what they were talking about, why does he unconsciously choose the verb capsize? Why not something else? There are many other ways this could have been said, but he chose capsize. And this is where we need to bring in the conceptual tool of context that I discuss in my 2015 book, Where Metaphors Come From. Notice that the conversation about Domino's life 2 years after the hurricane provides us with a particular context. And so in working on this book, where I talk about the issue of context, I suggest that there is a relatively small number of general context types, and context types are expressed by, or or are realized by a variety of contextual factors. Okay, I try to be a lot more specific than this here. In particular, and of course I cannot go into the discussion at length because this is the topic of the book, so we have to distinguish four kinds of context: the situational context, the discourse context, the bodily context, and the conceptual cognitive context. Now, as I mentioned, each of these kinds of context types are realized by particular contextual factors. The situational context is realized by the physical environment, cultural situation, social situation. The discourse context, surrounding discourse or co-text or the previous discourse, knowledge about the speaker, topic, hearer, or dominant forms of discourse. The bodily context is, as it is best known, realized by correlations in experience. Notice that I make a huge divergence from standard conceptual metaphor theory because I am thinking of correlations in experience as a part of bodily context. But also bodily conditions and body specificities, and the conceptual context consists of the metaphorical conceptual system. And I take that to be the default context in the use of metaphors, because I am not suggesting that in each and every case we are relying on the physical environment or the surrounding discourse, because the default case may be the metaphorical conceptual system. This is when we use well-known, highly conventionalized, and habitually used, routinely used metaphorical expressions like defend the thesis. But as we know from Lakoff, ideology also plays a role. Concerns and interests and history are also contextual factors. These are not theoretically arrived at notions. These are completely empirically arrived at notions as I have found them in a large amount of written corpus. So let's see how these apply to the case of the hurricane capsized Domino's life. Notice that they are sitting in New Orleans discussing his life. And we can say that the still visible site of the devastation caused by the hurricane is the situational context. This is the physical context. The physical contextual factor is the physical environment. You can actually see the overturned boats and the devastated buildings and so on. So this is what I think is responsible for the journalist coming up with the mental space level metaphor. A sudden unexpected turn of events for the worse in Domino's life is the capsizing of Domino's boat in the course of his sea journey. So this is why he's using capsizing. He's talking about how, probably his mind is activated in that situation by the still visible site of the devastation, like overturned boats. However, the memory of the overturned boats, the journalist remembers this from the newscasts, and Domino remembers these, and this is what I call the conceptual cognitive context. And this would probably be the motivation for living a life he's journeying. And the topic of the conversation, they're talking about Domino's life, and this gives us life is travel. And the universal experience of falling down and not being able to function normally primes us, or primes both the journalist who writes the article and the readers of the article to use and to accept and understand and interpret the metaphor as we do. Because notice, functionality is staying erect. We know that. However, in the situation, it is still a visible sight how there are boats overturned, so they cannot move properly. That's where we get action is motion, and inability to move is inability to act. And, we are in a way primed, and the particular conceptual metaphors on the different levels are primed by the context. At least this is what I think. Conclusions. If we adopt this way of looking at conceptual metaphor theory, I think we can resolve certain problematic issues, not the least of which is what is a conceptual metaphor. Okay, we know that a conceptual metaphor is understanding one domain in terms of another domain. But is that the case? No. If I am right, we have a different conception of a conceptual metaphor, in that conceptual metaphors occupy at least 4 levels, 4 different levels of ontological levels. So this would change what we mean by a conceptual metaphor. This is why I call it the multi-level view of metaphor. We would also get an answer to the sometimes embarrassing question, which conceptual structures are used in conceptual metaphors? Because Lakoff himself first used domain, and then he used frame, immoral politics, and in the paper that he co-authored with me, we use cognitive model, and then other people cultural model, and then scenes and scenarios, and God knows what else. So what are the conceptual structures? Now we get a more or less precise answer to that question. It is all 4: the image schemas, the domains, the frames, and the mental spaces, and the metaphors occupying these different levels. Also, conceptual metaphor theory has often been criticized that it is too static. I mean, if you just think of a conceptual metaphor as a static correspondence between 2 frames or 2 domains, that's really a problem, because it lacks any kind of operationalization, any kind of processing, or the possibility of talking about processing. And I am offering a hypothetical idea for that. What is the role of context? Why is a particular metaphor chosen? What I have tried to show here, that it is not by accident. It is not just by whim that the journalist uses capsize. It is largely because of the physical situation in which they are together with Fats Domino. And also, it is very difficult to come up with a decent account of creativity for the use of metaphors, and capsize is a creatively used metaphor, because if you look up capsize in any dictionary, you will not find a metaphorical meaning for it. But this way, we can have a pretty good explanation. And there are several other things that I did not list because I am sure we have run out of time, but here I stop. And if you have any questions, or if you want to make any comments, please let me know.
Zoltán, thank you very much for your talk. We can, see how much you tried to contribute to the expansion of the conceptual metaphor theory, and brought these new insights into the understanding of the theory, which is very welcome. So thank you very much for the enlightening talk. I wonder if you could just, for us to have a better picture of yourself, if you could just stop your presentation. If you go to the bar and say, stop presenting.
Okay.
Before we start the question and answer period.
Okay.
Good. That's better.
Yeah.
At the same time, Monica, do you have people who have already, written down questions on the chat?
No.
Not yet. Okay, so questions haven't started yet.
Well, if there are questions later, please let me know and I'll try to react in email, let's say.
Probably there will be one or two questions now. We can give them some time.
Speak out instead of writing.
Questions or comments or,
Yes, could I make a comment?
Aline has a comment, and also
And,
Francisco.
Yeah.
Okay, Professor Mendoza. Yes, perhaps we could start with Francisco and then Aline. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I think it's a very illuminating talk, and I really enjoyed it. And I think that one of the strengths is that it provides a conceptual pathway that has never appeared in metaphor theory, that connects long-term and short-term memory, that really connects what we store in our minds with what we actually do when we use language. And that's one of the great strengths it has. I'm only struggling to see the difference between your use of domain and frame. You mentioned Chuck Fillmore and something that you must have said about it, but I still see frames as a structure in conceptual domains. So maybe the two things are the same in matter of fact.
Yeah.
Maybe
Okay.
explain that a little bit more.
All right. Okay. So in this view of things, we can think of a domain as a large encompassing area of experience, like life, or like the body, or like travel, or the mind. These are all domains. However, these are extremely broad, and they must be structured by much more specific aspects of them. So the body domain seems to be a good example for this, because we talk about the body, but the body is composed of, or the body as a domain is composed of a large number of frames. So for example, there is, and this is Karen Sullivan talking about the exercise frame, which assumes the body domain. And Eve Sweetser is talking about roughly the same thing. There is the digestion frame that also assumes the body frame. And it is in this sense that a domain is broader, it is more schematic, than a frame that actually constitutes, a particular domain.
How do you think you could handle this when you come to very generic experience, like talking about actions, instruments, processes? People talk about those concepts, and are those domains or are they frames?
I would say that
Because
they
if you have
they primarily have to do with imischema level metaphors, and they would not be domains. Domains are somewhat more specific because action we can see actions, for example, as consisting of a large number of particular domains, like building, like travel, like
would be frames. Then the building frame.
I am okay.
And the action frame, and then you said actions and motion. Actions are seen in terms of motion. Actions are motion. Are they domains?
Well, okay, maybe the terms that I am using are problematic from certain perspectives. I'm also using Langeker, who is discussing this issue, and he's making a roughly similar distinction between frames and domains. He is distinguishing them in terms of specificity. And so maybe it would be best to simply forget about these names that we are using, like domain and frame. We should be talking about concepts that are more schematic than other concepts, and in that sense distinguishing them, but we will still need some terminology to refer to them, and that is difficult. Yeah, because I can only use the standard terminology for this.
Yep, makes sense. It could be higher and lower level.
Yeah, it's I know that you're talking about these issues in terms of higher and lower. Maybe that or something like that would be the solution.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would not commit myself to making distinctions that are difficult to make theoretically speaking. But on the other hand, intuitively, I think we can see that, for example, the body domain, the body is more generic than digestion or walking or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both for this explanation.
Yeah.
Aline, now it's your turn.
Hi, Zoltán.
Hi.
It was a nice talk. Thank you. I have a comment because I was wondering, I've been thinking about the matter of context for some time, because in my research on women with breast cancer and the way they refer to their disease, they usually choose a specific kind of metaphor. Either is war metaphor or traveling metaphor. But it happens that this is an almost universal metaphor, because if you're researching other places in the world, you are going to have war metaphor to refer to cancer, for example. And I was wondering, when we think about context, contextualization, the dynamicity of context, when people from different places choose exactly the same kind of metaphor to refer to their disease. And when I was observing the conceptual cognitive context. Previously, I called the online context in my work. I was attached to the concerns and interests, but to which point is it an unconscious choice, or is this arbitrary? How can we define that? Because sometimes we have very creative metaphors when women talk about their disease, but it's usually the same, war or traveling metaphors. It's very, very funny, and not only in Brazil, in other parts of the world.
Okay. Well, of course, the story that I have given here is not the full story, in the sense that that contextual influence is not the only kind of influence, because there is another influence, or maybe this is another kind of context that actually goes against the local context and its influence, and probably globalization of metaphors comes into the picture. But globalization actually works against any locally defined ideas, metaphorical ideas. And but you know, I am what you found makes perfect sense, but I have the feeling that this is mostly the Western world, and I very much doubt that, you know, the Australian Aboriginals or the Zulus and so on would use these metaphors when they talk about particular diseases.
Yes.
So the global influence on metaphorical conceptualization is a big factor, and I did not talk about that, but yeah, you're right.
Yes, and another thing is when we discuss the mappings and all the structures that are involved. What is when you think about that example? When you choose some aspects and not others in a specific domain that you have stabilized in your mind, why do you think you choose some aspects to this mapping and not others that are involved in this concept? I don't know if I'm clear.
Yeah. So why is fire exit used in relation to the European Union is a building metaphor? And we are not supposed to use that because it is not conventionally used. Well, I have a complicated story about this. There, the mappings somehow work out differently. Given a particular target domain that is structured by a particular source domain, like the European Union is a building, what we do is that this well-established understanding of the European Union as a building consists of a variety of things, like people ask, what happens if the European Union doesn't work out? How can we leave it? So the idea first appears in the target domain, and then you try to find the corresponding source domain item that fits your habitually used conceptual metaphor for that. And so that goes against the standard theory that you always go from the concrete source to the abstract target. So that would be my my account.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Zoltán.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any more questions? Thank you.
Hello,
Oh,
my name is Fabio, and actually, I have a simple question. It's actually a curiosity. I want to know if this word capsizing is conventionally used in American language, or the reporter was creative when he asked that question about the dominance.
I'm sorry. The Your voice doesn't come through very clearly, and I didn't understand the question.
Okay,
Could you
okay,
say?
okay.
can you
I will speak
repeat?
louder. Yeah,
Okay.
okay. The expression capsizing.
Yeah.
I want to know if it's common to use this word, or the reporter was creative using this metaphor,
Yeah.
or if it's
Okay.
normal to use this
Yeah. Yeah.
expression.
Okay. Okay. Now I can hear you and I understand the question. Um, uh, I was wondering about the same thing when I first read this newspaper article, and I checked in a dozen of English dictionaries. I checked the word capsize, whether it has this metaphorical use, and none of those dictionaries have given any metaphorical use for a capsize. That's what made me really curious about it, that it has no habitual, routine like metaphorical application. But given all these mappings and levels of metaphors, we have an easy time understanding what it means. So that's what I could say about that.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, let's check the chat. Sometimes people just write them down.
Yeah, okay.
But do you have any questions in written form there in the chat?
Well, if
Well,
there's
let's see.
nothing else,
I don't know if Monica heard me, but anyway, I know it's pretty late for you there in Hungary.
Sorry,
well,
Danielle
I
has signed up for
Yeah,
a
okay.
question.
Danielle,
Yeah,
I just saw there.
Danielle
Maybe,
Curvelo.
maybe we
Hi
could make it, Danielle, before you speak, maybe we could make this the last one because of, I'm thinking about Zoltán, and it's like 5 hours more than we have here. And, it's kind of getting late for him. Not for us. We are right in the beginning of the
Yeah.
afternoon or the middle of the afternoon. Okay, Danielle, please.
Of course, I understand. So I research on I work on a research focus on how animations can pass the messages we focus in sorry I work in research and how animations can pass the messages for kids and adults for learning. Sorry, I'm very nervous.
How animations can make learning easier for children
And adults
and adults as well.
using metaphors like
Okay.
Steven Universe use the characters for kids and can make messages like theme of adults teams.
Okay. And your question?
I am not sure. I'm not sure.
I think he's carrying on. Yes, Danielle.
How can we analyze this with the focusing the research?
With the
How animations can pass the messages for kids and adults with work with metaphors.
Animations.
Yes.
I am not sure I understand what
perhaps,
you mean.
Danielle, if you spoke in Portuguese to us, and then we can maybe just synthesize and make a summary of your question.
Sim, desculpa, eu posso falar em português então?
Sim.
Desculpa, então, que eu tô meio nervoso. Eu tô fazendo uma pesquisa que como podemos usar animações para que passam assuntos adultos para crianças e como podemos usar isso com aprendizado, usando as metáforas, para desenvolvimento delas em si.
Uhum. E a sua pergunta?
Como podemos analisar esse fenômeno das animações, passando mensagens que irão ajudá-las no desenvolvimento do aprendizado?
Sim. Então quer dizer, mais ou menos como que metáforas podem ajudar no aprendizado de adultos e crianças, é isso? Eu também não entendi muito bem a sua pergunta.
É isso aí.
Certo, ok. Zoltán,
Yeah.
he's mainly interested in seeing, metaphor's role in facilitating learning for both adults and children. It goes off a bit of your talk, but maybe you could just say one or two sentences in that regard.
Well, as far as I know, and you need to be a developmental psychologist to deal with this. As far as I know, children cannot really be taught metaphors. They learn metaphors in the course of their development, and there have been some empirical studies, for example, on how children acquire time is motion as a metaphor. And so some people are working on that, but they are cognitive psychologists. Being a cognitive linguist, I don't know very much about that field, except to say that on the basis of this one or series of studies that compared English-speaking and Turkish-speaking children and their acquisition of metaphors, was the major finding was that they begin to understand the time is motion metaphor around the age of 4, not before that. So they had all kinds of, they put them in experimental situations and also observed them. And it's about 4 years of age that seems to be the turning point in the acquisition of metaphors like time is motion. And in the case of adults, probably you can do a lot of things. And I myself have done some empirical work on this, how to teach conceptual metaphors in secondary school. And if you're interested, the paper, it was one of the first papers devoted to this issue, 1996, in Applied Linguistics. You can find my paper on ResearchGate if you're interested. Yeah.
It will be nice for you to deepen your knowledge in this subject, Daniel. Yeah.
Yeah, eu irei pesquisar.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So I think we are, going to say goodbye. See you soon.
Okay.
Not just now. Monica maybe has some few questions. A few comments before we go.
No, I just want to thank Zoltán for this enlightening talk. I think you have really been very brilliant in this afternoon, and probably you have helped a lot of people and kind of given people a taste of your book. So
Yeah.
I'm the one who's going to, I'm one of those who's going to buy it
Okay. Okay.
tonight, if possible.
Thank you.
Right. And some nice comments here, thanking you for a very nice, amazing talk. And Francisco is also saying thanks a lot.
Can I make a quick question? Hi.
Who's just
This
now?
is Morgana speaking.
Morgana. Okay,
Yeah.
Morgana. If Zoltán agrees.
If it's a very short one, because I need to go somewhere else, not to sleep, but
Sorry, I was gathering courage to speak out
yeah.
loud.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry. I read in emotion concepts and in other texts, in other of your texts, you talk about 11 metaphors of fear metaphors.
Yeah.
And they are all in English. And I was wondering if you ever found different metaphors in Hungarian.
For this particular concept,
fear, yes.
For fear, to be honest, I haven't looked into it because I have always been in an English department or American Studies department. I never needed to work on Hungarian. I did some work on Hungarian for anger, but not on fear. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. It was just a curiosity.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Thank you for your talk also.
Yeah,
and I read your book already. It's great.
Okay, thank you again for inviting me to give this talk. It was a pleasure. And hopefully we will see each other in person again in the not too distant future when the virus is gone, although I have certain doubts about that.
Yes, we all hope the same.
Okay.
We'll certainly meet either there or here.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So thank you very much.
Okay.
And just one thing, Zoltán, the article. The article you sent us has been translated, and it will be published next year.
Okay, great.
Remember?
Translated into Portuguese.
Yeah, it's been translated into Portuguese. Remember, you sent
Which
it.
article?
It's about metaphor in media.
Oh.
Yeah,
oh, okay.
Remember,
it's for. I think it's for a publication MIT is organizing. Is that right,
yes,
Monica?
Yes.
Okay, right.
Oh, okay.
So it's been translated, and I just wanted you to know that the work is already done. So
okay,
now it's just waiting
Okay.
for publication. Okay.
Okay.
Thank
Okay.
you very much. You
Okay,
were
thank you.
very sweet. The day I asked you, the next day you sent it, and the other day I found out that my thank you note was still in my box.
Okay.
I wrote it and didn't send it.
Thank you very much, Zoltán, for being with us, and thank you for this wonderful talk.
Okay,
and
thank you.
we are anxious to read your book. Okay.
Okay, great.
At least I am, and
All
Monica
right.
as well.
Okay.
Okay. Right. See you all soon.
And say hello to Judith.
Okay, I will.
Yes.
I will.
Right.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
People saying bye and thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Mendonça. Thank you, Aline.
Yes.
Thank you, Maris.
Yes.
And Maiti, and all the ones who have attended the conference.
Okay. All right. See you, Zoltán. As I say, all you have to do is hit the red phone there in the middle.
Okay.
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 Congratulations. It's
See
great.
you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Marisi.
Welcome, Mônica.
Mônica, eu preciso sair da sala agora. Depois a gente conversa mais. Então, só agradecer a todos mais uma vez, quem ainda estiver aqui conosco. não é? E dizer que na próxima semana nós voltamos ao horário normal. Foi algo que eu esqueci de dizer. E com a professora Rosemary Platan, né? Monteiro Platan, a nossa colega da Universidade aqui de Fortaleza, da UFC. Mas isso aí a gente fala na divulgação.
Divulgar,
né? Exatamente. Pois...
Ana, ainda o professor Francisco ainda está conosco.
Sim. Mas...
só para agradecer. Thank you, Professor Francisco Mendonça.
No, you're welcome. Bye-bye. Take care.
Thank you for
the invitation
being with us this afternoon. And don't forget that we have a second part of your talk for next year.
For next year. Okay, see you.
See you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Para participar da próxima, tem que fazer o
mesmo processo. Você vai... Isso, você vai... sempre vai ser assim, para garantir mesmo a presença e também, de certa forma, para um controle da gente saber quem está na sala. Tá certo?
Certo. E como eu fico sabendo desse evento? Porque eu sou de outra universidade.
Todas
mas
as quintas.
Exato, e ele é divulgado por meio do nosso Instagram, do Facebook, e também de grupos, né, de muitos grupos. Você é de qual universidade?
É a Universidade Estadual da Paraíba.
Da Paraíba, sim. Então, se você acessar @gelpcolim, você vai entrar na nossa página e no Instagram. E aí você vai ter, daqui mais uns dias, você vai ter a divulgação da próxima palestra.
Que nós teremos palestras até o dia 22 de dezembro, que vai...
Mônica, eu não estou te ouvindo. Alô? Mônica? Houve uma interrupção. Não sei se a Mônica ainda está conosco. Mas nós teremos, como ela dizia, nós teremos as palestras até o dia 22 de dezembro. Então, ainda temos um bom percurso pela frente. E aí eu falava com a pessoa da Universidade da Paraíba, não é? Você então, nos procura nas redes sociais e você vai encontrar as informações sobre as próximas palestras. São divulgadas semanalmente. Tá bom? Então, eu vou...
@gel...
eu vou colocar aqui no chat.
Certo. Obrigada.
Só um instante. Mônica?
Caiu, deu um pico de energia.
Houve uma interrupção, exato. Mas eu continuei aqui respondendo as observações da nossa colega, e já informei o Gelp Colim, né, no Facebook, no Instagram. E aí, inclusive, nós gostaríamos, né, de solicitar às pessoas que não apenas acessassem, mas também assinassem o canal também do YouTube e seguir nossas páginas, né? Certo.
Ana, eu estou fazendo uma lista de todos os e-mails, porque eu vou passar também a informar por e-mail, quando você enviar, para aqueles que já fizeram parte de alguma palestra. Está entendendo? Então, quando você manda...
Eu mando sempre aquele e-mail, que inclusive que eu já mandei direto em inglês, porque tem gente do Brasil e de fora, mas eu mando mais para as pessoas que estão na nossa lista de palestrantes e contatos muito imediatos. né?
Não, mas eu estou listando esses.
Mônica, porque a ideia do formulário, como o Antônio já destacou, é para evitar que o link fique muito solto por aí e a gente fique sem controle de quem entra na sala, entendeu?
Não, mas eu não vou enviar o link, não é link direto, eu vou enviar aquele convite que você manda.
Ah, entendi.
Eu vou mandar para todos que já participaram alguma vez. Tá entendendo?
Talvez seja interessante. Agora, todo mundo, né? Com poucas exceções, todo mundo tem o Instagram e o Facebook, então fica fácil também. Pois é. Tá bom.
Porque eles podem repassar para outras pessoas o e-mail para divulgar também, e quem acessar o YouTube, ou o Instagram, ou o GELP, se assina, né? Se inscreve no canal, assina lá e já fica divulgando também as palestras, porque nós ainda temos 16, né, por vir.
Pois é. Então, acho que é uma boa ideia. Maria Elisa, eu acho que comentou alguma coisa no chat.
Eu perdi o chat porque eu vim para o celular, porque o meu computador deu um pico e o meu no break está meio problemático.
Não, acho que não. Eu tinha a impressão que ela tinha dito alguma coisa aqui.
Eu acho que ela deu boa tarde.
Foi, é o que tem que registrar no chat.
Agora, Ana, você me manda a lista, porque o meu apagou, né? Eu acho que quando eu entrar, eu não consigo.
Toda semana eu estou mandando a lista juntamente com o vídeo, até mesmo quando eu encaminho para o Antônio.
Tá,
aí depois eu até te falei que não divulgasse o vídeo, porque ele vai editar ainda e lançar aonde, menina? No YouTube.
No YouTube.
Tá certo.
Tá justificado.
Tá certo. Tem uma pessoa que eu acho que não sabia da mudança de horário. O Gabriel acabou de entrar. Nossa palestra foi mais cedo hoje, Gabriel. Se você me ouve.
Gabriel
Loyola.
Gabriel é de onde?
Gabriel, nós divulgamos no cartaz, divulgamos também, foi postado no Instagram, no Facebook, divulgamos nos grupos, não é? Ele diz, acabei de ver, sim, acabei de ver. Pois é.
Mas, Gabriel, você vai ter...
Tem a palestra no YouTube, né? Exato. Tem.
Não?
Exatamente. Exato. Porque às vezes a pessoa não atenta para a mudança de horário no cartaz, né? A gente faz uma filtragem ali, às vezes, por causa da quantidade de informações que recebe. Pois é, mas é isso, você pode nos assistir agora no YouTube, né? Dentro de poucos dias, tá bom? Mônica, eu vou sair da sala agora, eu vou deixar vou parar a gravação, tá bom?
Eu não vou poder, porque eu sempre fico depois para copiar coisa, mas dessa vez eu não tenho como copiar.
Não precisa, porque eu vou te mandar a lista do chat.
Tá certo.
Tá bom?
Então tá joia.
Então tá bom.
Obrigada.
Tudo de bom para os que ainda estão por aqui. Tchau, tchau.
Doutora Maria Elias ainda está na sala?
Ainda, Ana Cristina.
Oi, Maria. Oi.
Nós estamos me dividindo aqui com a reunião do departamento que está no mesmo horário.
Tá certo.
Complicado.
Então, eu sei como é que é. A Mônica também, ela se vira nos 30, né, Mônica? Para poder dar certo.
Aí eu estou ouvindo um pouco assim, quando a discussão está forte lá, eu vou para lá, certo?
Tá certo.
Mas esse trabalho de vocês está muito bom, a promoção dessas lives.
A gente, quando começou, não achava que ia ser tão extensa, né? Mas eu fui chegando, fazendo o convite aos colegas, e as pessoas foram, né, se prontificando, e acabamos
comprando a ideia, né, Ana?
De 30 palestras.
Foi muito bom, está sendo muito bom.
Pois tá bom, gente. Pois um beijo aí para vocês e vou interromper agora, tá bom?
Tá joia. Fique com Deus.